Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Travis Rossick. I'm the public sector CTO at a company called Rubrik. Today, we're going to talk about the importance or the value in cyber resilience as a cyber deterrence strategy. So feel free to ask questions, make it interactive. Hearing myself talk for a whole hour is not my favorite thing to do. So feel free to chime in and don't be shy. Okay. As I mentioned, my name is Travis Rossick. I've been in cybersecurity for 20 plus years, supporting federal government. So recruited out of undergrad by the NSA to do cyber work, helped stand up some of the early flyaway incident response teams for what's now Cyber Command. Worked in the DoD PKI program office in the early days. Worked in STIGs accreditation work as well, CCRIs, which are now CORAs. Also led various enterprise security projects across the department, led an agency red team, so cyber exercises, testing weapon systems, and then also measuring cyber readiness for the department and collecting a lot of metrics for the joint staff, the DoD CIO, and Cyber Command. So quite a broad perspective across a lot of the cyber components and problems. And then in the last 10 or 15 years, been building innovative technology to help solve some of those hard problems. And worked at companies like McAfee, FireEye, Mandiant, Tycon, and the company now Rubrik. So basically a lot of focus on attack prevention, detection, response. So looking at how do we harden systems, how do we do better detection at the endpoint, the network level, how do we use AI to make that process better, and then looking at the way the landscape has changed. We're not really going to be able to keep up with the threat actors and their ability to outpace acquisition or compliance. So how do you survive the attack? How do you sustain it? And how do you recover as quickly as possible? So that's kind of what brought me to Rubrik and where I've been focusing my time the last couple of years. So from that perspective, if you look at the definition of deterrence theory, it's taking actions that are aimed to influence the adversary's decision making. So typically broken down into these four factors. And obviously there's PhDs in this topic. So I'm just going to touch briefly around some of the cyber aspects. But obviously it ties into the multi-domain aspects as well. But from a cyber perspective, looking at from the threat actors, what is the cost of taking action? What's the cost of restraint or not doing anything? What are the benefits of the action, and then what are the benefits of the restraint? So we're going to bring these four factors up throughout the presentation to kind of talk through a little bit of those. But the starting point really was kind of looking at the defensive side and where most of the limitations, right? We set the limitations for ourselves. It's in compliance requirements and kind of how we calculate cyber risk. So back in the day when I was looking to calculate cyber risk for certain programs and key systems, we really broke it into these four variables. So the threat, the vulnerability, the impact, if there was a successful attack, or what's the impact of the mission, and what's the likelihood this is going to happen. So used to be nobody believed any of this stuff was possible. So we've at least come a long ways where it's in the news on a regular basis, which is unfortunate. But now that we're all tied to technology from a mission perspective, any type of cyber risk almost directly impacts the mission risk. So we can't really bifurcate the two anymore. So what's also changed over the last 20 plus years, so if you look at the way the department classifies different sophistication of threat actors, so what's really changed from this kind of lexicon is the script kiddies or the nascent threat actors are, that line is blurry now. So getting tools on the deep and dark web, buying these capabilities, social engineering attacks, it really makes the sophisticated threat actors, much more voluminous. So there's a lot more threat actors that have the top tier capabilities because you can, the well-resourced organizations or cyber criminals can go buy these capabilities from the same groups that are selling them to government entities. So the lines are blurred. There's a lot more of these more sophisticated threat actors, and you can't underestimate your adversary. So the other thing that's also changed is the big push around software supply chain attacks, and specifically those of which there's destructive intent. So here's some examples of some major software supply chain attacks where there was a destructive or wiper type of impact in there. And the challenge with this is, as from an acquisition perspective, organizations are buying more and more software. It's more and more black box, and you don't really know what you're getting, and you don't really know what's in there. You don't know how often it changes. Patch Tuesday comes out, how many thousands or hundreds of vulnerabilities are in there. Maybe it fixes some problems, but it opens up other problems. So you don't really know what you're getting most of the time. So, and then from a threat actor perspective, it's a lot harder to go after 50 or 100 high value targets, well-resourced organizations. If I can go after one of the software supply chain vendors that isn't well-resourced, and I just use my special tools on one victim, then I get access to hundreds or thousands globally. So it's a much better calculus for them to kind of go after this path. And we've seen some pretty impactful ones in the past, and I'm sure there's going to be many more in the future. Okay. So that kind of talked a little bit about the threat and the threat actor capabilities and some of their motives. The next area is looking at the vulnerability aspect of measuring cyber and mission risk. So as you can see, the rapid growth in discovered vulnerabilities in the wild year over year. I mean, I've not met an organization that can patch these many vulnerabilities and mitigate them faster than an adversary can exploit them. It's defies the laws of physics, and it's not even though our compliance requirements, check the box kind of approach makes you think that this is the right path, but it's not a winnable fight. So so part of what I like to do is kind of get people to kind of realize this and realize that this isn't the fight that we should be fighting, and or it's a false sense of security, right? So even though we're compliant doesn't mean you're secure. Most of the victims that make the news are compliant, and the adversary has been incredibly successful. The other thing to note is these vulnerabilities are just the known ones. So these don't cover the software supply chain attacks, which we don't really know about. Doesn't cover the 0 days. It doesn't cover insider threats. So there's a whole host of impactful vulnerabilities that this doesn't track. So making matters worse, we're all data hoarders. So within a lot of these networks and environments, they're 15, 20 years old. And the people who built them, the ones who designed them, the ones who started putting in data or sensitive data, they're no longer there, or they've PCS'd, or they've retired. So typically, most organizations' environments look like this. So when I was doing incident response work, we would go into environments and we wouldn't even know what the impact was because the site that was victimized didn't know what was on what systems or who built them. They were just there to keep the lights on. That was their priority. From a zero trust architecture perspective, from data risk and security, not knowing what you have it makes it really difficult to protect. And you can't compute risk because you don't know what the impact is if you don't know where your sensitive data is or who has access. So the scary thing is, as bad as this problem is, it's going to get significantly worse in the coming years with the rapid growth of data that we have. Okay, so just taking a pause here based on, we talked about the threats and we talked about the vulnerabilities. So the cost of action from a threat actor is pretty low. For them to be able to target one of those tens of thousands of vulnerabilities, maybe reverse engineer a patch, exploit that, find a 0 day, buy something on the deep and dark web, it's relatively cheap. And the benefits are incredibly high. They get access, they can build persistence, they can sell intellectual property, they can get military or other types of trade secrets, or they can just wreak havoc from a hacktivist type of group. And then from a restraint is they just miss the opportunity, so they're going to be motivated to take the action, and then very minimal consequences. Okay. So looking at the impact, I I was moderated a webinar recently with Rob Joyce, the former cyber director at NSA, and Ron Ross, who is one of the lead cyber fellows at NIST, building a lot of the cybersecurity requirements over the years. And we talked about the measuring cyber risk, and talking to Rob in the impact piece of it, he's like, it's clear that the threat actors' motives have completely changed, and they're specifically building to have destructive type of effects. So, for the Chinese to go after, wastewater treatment facilities in the U.S., they're not stealing IP. Like, there's really no, there should be no expectation that's the reason. It's only for destructive nature. So kind of getting that mindset that, hey, we're just going to bleed our intellectual property and we'll just keep getting by and giving the adversaries access. Now this access, they're just pillaging as much as they can. They're pre-positioning across the whole country and actually the whole globe, in preparation for when it suits them. So in this conversation, also talking to Ron from NIST, talked about the what is the likelihood